In February 2025, Pope Francis was hospitalized due to bilateral pneumonia. Although he showed slight improvement, his health condition remains delicate and the prognosis is reserved. The global Catholic community continues to pray for his recovery, recognizing his vital role as a spiritual and moral leader in contemporary times. Follow the legacy of Pope Francis from his childhood to the present day. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, known worldwide as Pope Francis, was born on December 17, 1936, in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina. The son of Italian immigrants Mario Jose Bergoglio and Regina Maria Savori, he grew up in a family of 5 children, where he was instilled with values of humility, hard work, and Catholic faith from an early age. During his adolescence, Bergoglio faced a serious health challenge, a severe respiratory infection that led to the removal of part of one of his lungs. This early experience with human frailty not only shaped his resilience, but also deepened his empathy and understanding of others' suffering. Before pursuing a religious vocation, Bergoglio trained as a chemical technician. After completing his studies, he worked in the field for a period, demonstrating dedication and competence in his duties. However, he felt a deeper calling to serve the faith. Initially, he entered the diocesan seminary of Villa Devoto, but soon decided to join the Society of Jesus, beginning his novitiate on March 11, 1958. This decision reflected his desire for a life of service, discipline, and commitment to the teachings of Christ. During his Jesuit formation, Bergoglio dedicated himself to humanistic studies in Chile. Later, he returned to Argentina, where in 1963 he obtained a degree in philosophy from the Colegio de San Jose in San Miguel. Between 1964 and 1965, he shared his knowledge as a professor of literature and psychology at the Colegio de la Inmaculada Concepción in Santa Fe and, in 1966, at Colegio del Salvador in Buenos Aires. These teaching experiences not only enriched his intellectual development, but also strengthened his commitment to education and holistic human development. Bergoglio's journey, marked by personal challenges and deep dedication to service, laid the foundation for his future leadership in the Catholic Church, culminating in his papacy as Pope Francis. Leadership in the Society of Jesus. After his ordination as a priest, Jorge Mario Bergoglio continued his journey in the Society of Jesus, establishing himself as an influential figure within the religious order. In 1973, at the age of 36, he was appointed provincial of the Jesuits in Argentina, becoming the youngest to hold this position in the country. His tenure, which lasted until 1979, coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in Argentina's history, the military dictatorship that began in 1976 and lasted until 1983. In this challenging context, Bergoglio had to balance the Jesuit mission with the increasing political and social tensions. The dictatorship, characterized by brutal repression of political opponents, censorship, and systematic human rights violations, placed religious leaders in a delicate position, especially those involved in social issues and vulnerable communities. As provincial, Bergoglio adopted a stance that some viewed as prudent and strategic, while others interpreted it as ambiguous or insufficiently confrontational in the face of the regime's atrocities. One of the most notable aspects of his leadership was his emphasis on social justice and care for the poor, fundamental values of Ignatian spirituality. He encouraged the formation of new Jesuits and the expansion of pastoral work, seeking ways to keep the order's mission alive amid the repressive environment. However, this period also generated controversies, particularly regarding Bergoglio's relationship with the dictatorship. Some critics accused him of not doing enough to protect his fellow Jesuits, especially those working in poor areas and seen as subversive by the government. The most emblematic case involved Jesuit priests Orlando Yorio and Francisco Jalix, who were kidnapped by the dictatorship in 1976. While Bergoglio denied any involvement in their arrest and claimed he worked discreetly for their release, the controversy persisted for decades. Despite the challenges and criticisms, his leadership within the Jesuit order shaped his perspective on leadership, humility, and service. This period strengthened his pastoral vision and his commitment to the most vulnerable, elements that would later define his tenure as Archbishop of Buenos Aires and, eventually, as Pope Francis. Episcopacy and Cardinalate. On May 20th, 1992, Pope John Paul II appointed Jorge Mario Bergoglio as Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, assigning him the titular See of Auca. His appointment marked the beginning of a new phase in his ecclesiastical journey, where he took on a more visible role in the Catholic Church hierarchy. As Auxiliary Bishop, he worked alongside the then Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Cardinal Antonio Corricino, becoming one of his main collaborators. His work was characterized by pastoral commitment and a special focus on the city's peripheries, striving to bring the church closer to the most vulnerable communities. Following Corricino's death in 1998, Bergoglio was appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires, taking over Argentina's most important archdiocese. His leadership style stood in stark contrast to that of many high-ranking prelates. He rejected privileges, refused to live in the episcopal palace, and chose to reside in a simple apartment, where he prepared his own meals. Additionally, he frequently used public transportation, reinforcing his image of closeness to the people. This approach was not merely symbolic, but reflected his theological and pastoral vision, emphasizing a church dedicated to the poor and marginalized. His work as Archbishop gained the attention of Pope John Paul II, who, on February 21, 2001, created him a cardinal, granting him the title of Cardinal Priest of San Roberto Bellarmino. At the consistory held in St. Peter's Basilica, Bergoglio received the red biretta and the cardinal's ring, symbols of his willingness to defend the faith even unto martyrdom if necessary. As a cardinal, he maintained his austere lifestyle and continued advocating for the marginalized, establishing himself as one of Latin America's most influential ecclesiastical figures. His leadership as Archbishop and Cardinal solidified his reputation as a pastor close to the people, a defender of the poor, and a critic of social injustices. These traits, along with his simplicity and unwavering faith, made him a respected figure within and beyond the Church, paving the way for his election as Pope in 2013. Election to the papacy. Pope Benedict XVI's resignation on February 11, 2013, was a historic event, as it was the first time in nearly 600 years that a pope voluntarily stepped down. This surprising decision paved the way for a new conclave, bringing together 115 cardinal electors in the Sistine Chapel to choose the next leader of the Church. The conclave began on March 12, 2013, and after 5 ballots, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected as the 266th Pope of the Catholic Church. His choice came as a surprise to many, as he was not widely considered frontrunner. Upon choosing the name Francis, he signaled the orientation of his papacy, an homage to Saint Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his humility, simplicity, and devotion to the poor. His election was historic for several reasons. He became the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Southern Hemisphere, the first Latin American, and the first non-European in more than 1,200 years. His approach to the papacy broke with traditional formalities. He rejected opulent vestments, chose a silver papal ring instead of a gold one, and opted to reside in the Casa Santa Marta rather than the Apostolic Palace. Throughout his papacy, Pope Francis has encountered an array of significant challenges, both within the Catholic Church and on the global stage. Internally, he has worked tirelessly to reform the Vatican's bureaucracy, known as the Roman Curia, striving for greater transparency, efficiency, and accountability. One of his most difficult and ongoing battles has been addressing the numerous sexual abuse scandals that have plagued the Church for decades. His response has included implementing stricter measures to protect victims, holding clergy accountable, and calling for a cultural change within the Church's leadership. While these efforts have been praised in some circles, critics argue that more drastic actions are still needed to ensure justice for survivors and prevent future abuse. Beyond the walls of the Vatican, Pope Francis has been an outspoken advocate for social justice and global peace. He has consistently used his platform to highlight pressing issues such as economic inequality, immigration, and the plight of refugees. His encyclicals, particularly Laudato Si 2015 and Fratelli Tutti 2020, have called for urgent action on climate change and emphasized the importance of human fraternity and dialogue between cultures and religions. These messages have resonated with many, but have also drawn criticism from conservative factions within the Church who argue that his approach is too progressive. Internationally, Pope Francis has played a key role in diplomatic efforts, fostering peace and reconciliation in conflict-ridden regions. He has mediated discussions between nations, advocated for an end to war and violence, and consistently called on world leaders to prioritize humanitarian efforts. His visits to war-torn areas and his appeals for dialogue between opposing factions have reinforced the Vatican's role as a moral and ethical voice in international relations. However, in recent years, Pope Francis's declining health has become an increasing concern for the Catholic Church and the world at large. Since 2021, he has faced multiple medical complications, including severe sciatica, knee problems that have often required him to use a wheelchair, and surgery for colon diverticulitis. Despite these challenges, he has continued to fulfill his papal duties with remarkable determination, although his public appearances have sometimes been limited due to his physical condition. In February 2025, concerns about his health intensified when he was hospitalized with bilateral pneumonia, a serious condition that can be particularly dangerous for elderly individuals. This hospitalization prompted an outpouring of prayers and well wishes from Catholics and non-Catholics alike, underscoring his global influence. While reports later indicated that his condition showed signs of improvement, the fragility of his health remains a pressing issue. The possibility of a papal resignation has been increasingly discussed, especially given the precedent set by his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who stepped down in 2013 due to health concerns. If Pope Francis were to resign, it would mark another historic moment in the Church's history and raise questions about the future direction of Catholic leadership. His potential successor would inherit a church in transition, facing ongoing internal and external challenges while navigating the expectations set by Francis's progressive vision. Some speculate that the next pope could either continue his reformist path or take a more traditionalist approach, reshaping the Vatican's stance on key issues. Regardless of the outcome, Pope Francis's legacy as a transformative leader is already firmly established. His tenure has been marked by a commitment to inclusivity, humility, and service to the most vulnerable. He has reshaped the papacy in ways that extend beyond doctrinal matters, emphasizing a more pastoral and compassionate approach to leadership. His calls for a church of the poor and his outreach to marginalized communities have endeared him to millions, reinforcing his role as a pope of the people. As he faces the twilight years of his papacy, the impact of his leadership will continue to be felt for generations to come. Whether he continues as pope or steps down due to health reasons, his influence on the church and the broader world remains undeniable. His vision of a more just, inclusive, and merciful church will serve as a guiding light for future generations of Catholics and religious leaders alike.